Thank you, sir. All right, so 3, 2, 1. Hello, I'm Christopher Crystal with Financial Stockholm, and welcome back. We've had a weekend of thoughts, and got to move around a little bit, I hope, and I hope you've been well. For me, what I noted most this weekend was when I spoke with people, they here in Sweden, the first pressing thought that came to mind was about energy cost, and that this winter is going to be very expensive. There were people who have electrical heating in their houses who are switching over to alternative fuel sources like wood. Some are looking at establishing a solar and trying to avoid some of these high electricity costs that are coming this winter. And you don't really see much in the local press to discuss the electricity network here in Sweden. We've run the articles about the higher electricity cost, but there's no addressing the issues and any sort of solutions other than potential wind and solar and battery networks and everything that can come in 5 or 10 years. But there's a continued push towards this electricity network and need for electricity. And that's a little bit of the, it's an oxymoronic problem, because you got to switch to an electric car, but if you don't have the electricity network to power the car, who gets to drive? And then you don't have the network set up to handle all of the cars you have today, nor would you have it set up so that in 10 years you could handle all cars being electric. So it's a perplexing issue, and I think when thought through, you would add a few more solutions in there that would help solve the problem. And so that's not really being addressed in the press, and we do see a continued press for what I see as an eventual war here in Europe. You have the comments from Putin, you have the annexation of the Ukrainian territories, you have the statements from the EU and NATO members discussing what would happen. You have now seen an attack or response back from the Ukraine going into cities like Lyman, which are under this Russian annexed region. We see here in Europe, everybody's calling the election that Putin had in Russia to vote to become part of Russia for these annexed regions. We're calling it shams. So there's a question of their election integrity. They're, of course, calling for question about the West election integrity in Russia. So you see a lot building up for a lot of hysteria, and you don't really see much talking about the actual exploration of what happened in the Nord Stream pipelines. You do have the United States saying that it will dive to the bottom of the problem. And then you also have Europe just clearly pointing the finger at Putin and saying he obviously blew up something that was a negotiating chip for him at the peace talk tables or any sort of economic discussions. He obviously blew it up. Italy has made their move now, where they've voted in a new party, or not a new party, but the Brothers of Italy, and Meloni is being called a right-wing fascist. But now they have no more gas coming through Austria. So Austria shut off the Russian gas pipeline to Italy. We'll see how that affects Meloni's politics, and we'll see how that affects EU politics, because you have one of the largest economic regions in Europe now going to be slowed dramatically. Where do they get their gas from? How will they power their industry? What will the consumers do? You also see a number of Russians wanting to get out of Russia and leave Russia because they don't want to fight. And magically borders appear again where borders are closed. So whereas everybody thought this was horrific when other administrations had set up walls and borders, you now see Europe doing this where they're saying, no, I'm sorry, you're Russian, you can't come here. Meanwhile, we took in immigrants, emigres from war-torn, terrorist-torn regions to Europe because they didn't want to go to war. They didn't want to fight. They didn't want to die. But we're now telling the Russian citizens, it doesn't really matter if you don't want to fight for Putin, you can't come here. So, and this irony is lost. We see no airlifts of Russian citizens to the United States. We see no airlifts or convoys of people coming to Europe. We see these people being closed out. So that's being ignored. And really what's on the table is the rhetoric for war. The United States has said this could be an act of war, or they haven't actually said the actual words, this is an act of war, but there would be retribution for anything. And they've already started more sanctions on Russia to make their point clear. And we see this coming from Russia, where we see advisors to Putin who are in the military and former military saying, use tactical nukes. And we see comments from Poland where they're saying they don't care about the nukes, they'll fight Russia. So we have a lot on the table that really increasingly points to war, because we don't see any sort of negotiation or movement towards some sort of peace talks. And we don't see any sort of real resolution coming. We have in Sweden a worsening economy. We had slowing car sales. We've already had the housing market starting to show longer time for sale of houses and apartments. We see less people showing up for the sale, the purchase of a house or an apartment. We saw the car sales. You get figures this morning talking about car sales. And then in the Svenska Dagbladet, they're running articles about increasing food kitchens, which are servicing single-family parents that are, they're at an economic stress. On Fridays, we traditionally have here in Sweden what we call Lördagsgodis. So it's the candy day for your kids. Take your kids down to the candy shop and you give them some candy because it's a treat for the week, and what they've earned their candy, so they get their sweet. And now you have an article in the paper saying how mothers are not able to buy ice cream for their kids. McDonald's would be a luxury. And whether you think McDonald's is overpriced or not, something that would be considered cheap by many is now considered a luxury. And then you have these growing food kitchens, and that's a disturbing trend. We already saw that the retail boutique handle, the actual shopping in the boutiques, has been going down. We've seen that there are a lot of office locations, and we've seen a lot of the boutique shop locations are up for rent. So we get a lot of negative signs combined with the higher energy cost and higher food cost. And we don't really see the press addressing it. And if you look further into the retail trade, or the detail trade as we call it, you would see that the figures are improving or holding steady at the discount shoppers. So for instance, I went to IKEA this weekend and it was packed. It was hard to get a good parking spot. And it wasn't just the hot dogs that people were going to buy. They were actually shopping and buying goods. So people are switching from the higher end retail down to the lower end retail. And why not? Because IKEA makes a product you can trust and you can use. And as much as people laugh about IKEA, the fact is you can see online sales of IKEA products from 20 years ago. So they make a decent quality that lasts for what the user needs. And they're getting a growth in sales probably. From what I hear internally, it's going very well in the US and doing well here in Europe for IKEA. One of the other issues that we have in Sweden, we had a lot of violence. We have a lot of shootings. We have a lot of bombings. We have a lot of rapes. And none of this is really being addressed in the press, other than to say that it happened. We don't see the new governments. We had it as part of their campaign on how they would change laws for longer prison terms, but we don't really see a real solution to address the issue of the drug trade and the violence associated with an escalation within that drug trade. And most of that, the violence is being committed more and more on each internal drug gang. So you see the drug gangs attacking other drug gangs. They're not going and shooting up police stations. They're not blowing up police stations. We've seen that in the past where you've had car bombs outside of a police station, like in Malmo, but in general, it doesn't really occur. So the violence issue is not being addressed. So we do see a general degradation here in Swedish society, and it's gone nationwide. It doesn't have to be only in the large cities. So it's overall a negative outlook. You do see some resilience in healthcare, maybe. That's an area where we've always been strong. It does represent a large portion of our trade with Europe, prepackaged medical goods or products. And so Alzheimer's drugs and other drugs that can be used to benefit your health would see or possibly could see increased favor within the financial sector or investment sector. You do see technology shorts being pulled, or not pulled, but actually put on. So companies like Truecaller, which have been shorted and are highlighted in the local Svenska Dagbladet press, talking about the short selling strategy. So who knows when we'll see limitations on short selling, but not at this point. And so technology stocks look to offer probably the quickest gain in that area. But for anybody who wants any trading advice, remember, we know Anders Haglund, and we can show his contacts so that you'll see where to go. And he offers online coaching, but that would be something else if you're looking for strategies. Another area where you do see increasing, you see more and more home security companies popping up and adding sales. They're even adding job ads. So you're seeing more in that sector because people are thinking about the violence and what it could be for their household. So that's maybe a good continued sector. The home services company, and I mean by the internet, so you have online gambling are getting revised looks, and you're also seeing the online gaming sector, although that would create a power demand, increase your living cost unless you're, if that's your cost and you're playing it for your certain hours. Booksellers that are online, where they're offering audiobooks, are getting looks. And so much more of a retrenchment into the household for society to wait out the storm of what's going on outside and to weather out the winter and the heating issues and energy cost. In the Danish markets, shippers are taking on a little water today. You're getting a mixed bag with some of the wind producers or wind energy producers. In Norway, of course, you're going to see some action on the oils and what they're doing for the gas pipelines. One of the companies that helped build the Baltic Pipe is a Swedish company, and that's Trelleborg. But you'll see an increased look in this. And if Norway can provide more gas to Poland and Germany, and maybe Italy wants gas from Norway as well. After all, the UK is getting plenty from Norway. That may be an area to look in as well. In our financial sector, the Danish banks are under a little pressure. You have tomorrow in front of the court the former CEO of Swedbank, Bonnesen. She'll be answering questions about money laundering, the KYC AML procedures and so forth, and how much of the transactions that Swedbank was involved in for money laundering. And the Danish bank, which Danske Bank said that they had none. They've released a lawyer report, or they've released a report on it. And when I say they had none, Swedbank in the article today in Svenska Dagbladet says they didn't have action in those transactions. So we'll see how that develops for Swedbank. But banks that don't have operations there, I believe, are Handelsbanken, and maybe a few of the Norwegian banks, maybe a few of the Finnish banks would be isolated from that. But you've had a lot of transactions going through these corruption state issues that are dealing in the East. And Swedbank had some of the largest territory coverage in those areas. So they'll probably be under continued pressure. And then that's really, I think the crux of it all is that we don't see any governments moving towards peace talks. We see governments moving towards war talks. Until this calms down, the market's going to be under a lot of pressure. It doesn't matter if Truss repeals the taxes to high-end earners in England, or continues with tax cuts for the rest of the country and the energy cost. We don't see enough positive move going forward right now to really drive a fundamental move forward for the markets. So you still have to be very careful, cautious, doing all your research. And if you need help, then there are others out there that can provide it. So, but the overall sentiment in Sweden is getting slightly more negative, and we do have movement forward with our government, where we'll see a coalition very soon, but we're still far from done. So I want to wish you a great day, and hope you have good success. So thank you very much from Financial Stockholm. Bye.